Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our new edition of KamayTalks. My name is Gabriela Ruggeri, and I'm managing partner of Kamay Ventures. Kamay is a corporate venture capital investment fund that seeks to invest in projects that add value to our community. Kamay is the first corporate venture capital fund in the region in which two large corporations come together, Coca-Cola and Arcor SAIC, in order to promote innovation and solutions that contribute to the digitalization of the different stages of the production process. Those interested in contacting us, please do so through our website, kamayventures.com. Today, we're joined here by a very special guest and an old-time friend of the house, Alan Moore. Alan is the author. Welcome, Alan. Alan is the author of two very interesting books, Do Design and Do Build, the latest one on how to make and lead a business the world needs. He's a designer and business innovator on a mission to help businesses discover their own unique beauty. In this interview, we will discuss how regenerative business practices create a sustainable path to long-term success for business owners, customers, and the world in general. Alan also mentors teams and individuals, delivers leadership programs, and advises clients on regenerative business practices. He has collaborated with companies and institutions all over the world, including PayPal, Microsoft, Xero, and MIT. He has spoken at several events, and it's our honor to have him here today. So, Alan, some have said Do Build is a guide to a renaissance with a promise of something better. Do you want to tell us about it?
Thank you very much, Gabby and Tony, for inviting me to be with you today, and more than happy to share some thoughts with you.
Do you want to share your screen?
I've got my screen. It's already there. There you go.
Yeah, there we go.
Sorry, wasn't quite where I wanted it to start. This very brief talk, which will then lead into a much deeper conversation with Gabby, is based on these two books. Do Design, Why Beauty is Key to Everything, and it's the beauty word, which is the most important bit here, was a book I published in 2016, which really was reflecting on how we should see beauty as a homecoming and a way that we should reclaim that for a way of thinking about business. And Do Build, which was just published this year in March, was really focusing on how businesses could be this engine, this means of transformation for a world that would be better for everybody. But the question is a lot of you will be asking, why have I chosen that word beauty, and what does that word beauty mean? And I just felt I wanted to share something very briefly with you, because I think it kind of puts a lot of it in context. I have been privileged to work with and work alongside many businesses and organizations in my life. But there was this point where in sort of 2014, I really started to think about what was
Hello?
sort of sat with that question for quite a long time. And I'm 57 years of age, and what I'm showing you now is a picture of me around about the age of, I think, 5 or 7, with my mum and my sister. And it takes me to a very particular memory. It's a family holiday in my family. My mum was always quite an anxious woman for a variety of different reasons, which I don't need to go into now. But whenever she was in that state, it would make me feel anxious. So I saw this person on the beach, and she was happy, she was joyful, she was laughing, she was playful, and that gave my heart great joy. My father was always a very beautiful, loving human being, and they actually, as a team, were always a great team. And to me, that was always very important when I look back on that. My brother and my sister were there. We don't always get on well with our siblings, as we know, sometimes from time to time. And then I saw myself actually, in my shorts, bending down, playing with my toys, and the sort of sea of Cornwall was in the background. The sky was blue, the sun was shining, and I thought, I'm at one with those I love the most. I'm at one with myself, and we're not always at one with ourselves, as we know, as we go through this journey called life. And I'm at one with the natural world, and it felt to me like a real homecoming. And the only way that I could describe that sense of unity or homecoming to me, both inside myself and externally, was beauty. And that is why I chose to write about beauty as a means of how I think we need to kind of recontextualize or rethink how business can play a role in the world. And that led me to write the first book. But just to sort of expand that from my own personal, epiphany or journey, there's a guy called Frank Wilczek. He's a Nobel Prize winning scientist, and he wrote a book called The Most Beautiful Question. And he said, what is the most beautiful question in the world? That question is the world a work of art? And he talks about Einstein's theory of relativity, so how the cosmos works at a macro scale. It's so big, as we know, that we don't know how big it is. Or Paul Dirac's theory of actually how subatomic particles over time and space can connect and dance with each other. And he talks about this is nature's deep design model. And the fact is that if we are all molecularly made of the same stuff, which we are, then we understand beauty at a fundamental level. There's a saying which is that beauty gets us out of the surfaces of things and into the foundations of actually how life really works. And I think that's something which is at a point now, here, at this moment in time, that we should be really thinking about and reflecting on. And then to go beyond that, and to add to that, if we think about how nature works, what is its operating model? Its operating model is that it's run one of the longest R&D, research and development projects we've ever known. Nature has learned to hang around for quite a while, well, all eternity. And my argument is that if we want to hang around for a bit longer, maybe an eternity too, then we might be wishing or willing to learn from her playbook. And the very principal operating model is that she is built on the concept of regeneration. So whereas I said that actually beauty gets us out of surfaces into the foundations of things, beauty actually gets us into this idea that takes us beyond sustainability. It takes us into this idea of how we frame the world in the concept of regeneration and how we create regenerative ways of living and being in this world. There's something else that I want to share with you, which is that beauty speaks a different language. When Do Design first came out, a person asked me, who was a very big player in the sustainability community, said, what can beauty give the world of sustainability? And this individual felt that somehow or other they put me in a corner and it would be very difficult for me to answer that question. And my reply was this. I said, I'm a musician and I can play what is called a sustaining note, but I cannot hold that note forever. And so in a way, the language of sustainability makes me feel like I'm hanging on by my fingernails, or that I'm trying to hold a roof up to protect those that I love the most, that actually I will never be able to sustain that position forever. And I said, in many ways, what you've done is you've taken out all of the really important things about what makes life worthwhile for us all living on this planet, like the word joy, like the word thrive, like the word wonder, like the word community, like the word transcendence. When we look at the natural world in its natural state, we are programmed to understand that these are the conditions in which life can thrive. And so actually beauty is actually the oxygen, it's the lifeblood. It gives us actually the chemistry and the sort of the magic, in a sense, of how we can be in this world in a different way. And also I said sustainability for me speaks this language of we've got to stop doing things. It's almost like we've got to regress And it's a very complex metaphor. It's a complex way of explaining the world. And as I said, in a sense, we can't put beauty on an XLS sheet. We can't measure it because actually, in a sense, we can't think it because we know it, because it is a fundamental part of who we are as human beings living on this place called Earth. In the book Do Build, I talk about the need to move from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And I won't move through all of these different attributes. But I think that what it shows is, as we look at this chart, it's very simple, but it asks us some very powerful questions about if we are going to bring businesses into this world that are going to be regenerative, if they're going to make a contribution to the world that we live in, we have to start thinking about a very different set of values and metrics about how we are going to do those things. As we know, there's a famous saying, which is what get measures gets made. And so we have to reframe the measuring and the metrics of what is important to us going forwards. And we all have to be part of that dialogue. In the Do Design book, I talk about this whole idea around purpose. And I just wanted to share this with you because I think it sort of fits into this idea of a regenerative approach to the world that we're in, and actually how we find our own personal mission. So in the same way that I sat with myself for quite a while, and where beauty came to me as this idea or ideal that I want to pursue, I wanted to share another story with you. So many, many years ago, there was a guy called Morihei Ueshiba, and he was a Japanese gentleman. He was a warrior. He was a soldier. He was very good at killing people. But actually, this was something that sat really badly within him as a human being. And he felt that actually this was not his calling. This was not the work that he was born to do on this earth. And so he retired into the mountains with a Zen master, and he reflected very deeply on what his purpose was. But what he realized is that his purpose was to protect all life that existed on this planet. So in fact, he invented the gentle martial art of Aikido. Now, those that practice Aikido are said to be ones that are given a huge amount of spiritual grace and a whole sense of equilibrium in this world. What was interesting is that in terms of the way that Morihei designed this gentle martial art, the person that was being attacked could defend themselves from the attacker and keep themselves safe from harm. But in the way that they responded to that energy coming towards them, they could also actually protect the attacker from hurting themselves. And he believed that was a way of unifying all of the universe's forces, because we are made of the light and the dark. There's no doubt about it. You know, there cannot be good without evil, etc., etc. There's no light without day. There's no up without down. But it's a question of where we choose to put our energy and our resources. Now, Morihei is no longer on this planet, but in a sense, he's left an extraordinary legacy as a great ancestor for all of the many millions of people around the world that practice the gentle art of Aikido. Now, I just want to share with you one story from the many that I've brought together in looking at lots of businesses that I believe to be beautiful and are regenerative. And before I get to that, I just want to share an idea then around this practice of making and design at actually quite a large scale. So you're looking at a gentleman called Dieter Rams. And Dieter is in his 80s now. Without Dieter, there would be no Johnny Ive. There would be no Apple iPod. He really is the godfather of a very different way of thinking about industrial design around industrial products. And Dieter is sitting around and sitting on all of the products that he designed, or some of the products actually that he designed in his life. He came out of the Second World War. He believed that design and mass industrial design could be a form of actually bringing a better way of living, a way of democratizing a better way of living and experiencing life for people in a whole variety of different ways. But in a very famous film that was made about him called Rams, Dieter said something very important. He said, the time of thoughtless design for thoughtless consumption is over. And I absolutely agree with that. And in part, my talk today is a provocation to all of you that are joining on this call and in this conversation that I'm going to have with Gabby, which is we really have to reflect very deeply on how we do that and what we bring to the world. And the other story that I want to bring here is about a guy called Doug, who invented the mouse. And when he died, the tech press said, designer of the mouse dies, as though actually it was the only thing that he had designed. And perhaps somehow he'd accidentally stumbled across this incredible innovation that I'm sure if I asked everyone on this call today if they've ever used a mouse, would put their hand up and said yes. Because Doug actually designed a couple of other things. He designed hypertext, and he also invented the very early versions of video conferencing. And we're all here as a consequence of the beautiful thing that Doug imagined and brought to this world. But there's something very important that connects to what Dieter was saying. Doug believed that if he could design products and services where it would enable people to come together over time and space to share knowledge and information, we might collectively be able to solve some of the world's most pressing problems. So I say we shouldn't ask what Doug designed, but what world Doug was trying to make. And that gets me on to my story, a short one about world making. Now, 25 years ago, and maybe actually some change, when I started my career, we didn't ask who made my clothes. We didn't ask where did my coffee come from. We weren't interested in supply chains. We weren't asking all of those sort of conversations now or questions that we are now having about actually where stuff comes from, how it's made, and where it ends up. And of course, as we know, this is now a very hot topic. So I just want to share with you one story about a company called Veja. Now, I know in Brazil that Veja is a media brand. It's got a number of sort of publications and titles, and it's very well known for that. This is a very different company, and it's founded by two Frenchmen. So I just want to tell you a little story about Veja. And in fact, actually, this is a picture of me wearing my Vejas on a hill in England somewhere. As you know, Veja takes its name from the Portuguese word for look. And this instance, they say, we want you to look at how these trainers are made. This is a business that is really committed to regeneration. They're very interested in how it resources its materials in an ethical and sustainable fashion, how it processes, how it manufactures, who it employs, how they pay them, how it ships its goods, even where it buys its electricity from. So it's looking at its whole business from a very, very kind of supply chain centric fashion. They all demonstrate, I think, a desire of businesses today to put actually purpose before profit to bring the good into the world. The two founders were really motivated by their very early experiences of looking at lots of factories around the world that were working in manufacturing at the early stages of, say, a supply chain. And they were really shocked by the unfair and unethical business practices. And they witnessed what they say were the unsustainable practices of harvesting, processing raw materials, which were in fact causing catastrophic damage both to humans and the environment. Now, these were two ex-merchant bankers. They weren't actually in the business of fashion or in fact making sneakers. But they asked themselves, could there be a way where we could address these issues of environmental justice and social justice, bringing this equilibrium of ecology, environment, and business back into a line with each other and demonstrate to the world that they could do that. And they also believe that businesses quite often are more powerful than sovereign states. As we know, Apple has more money than a lot of companies that sit in its bank accounts across the world. And so it has actually great power in terms of how it might choose to actually change the way that we work and we operate. And so in a sense, actually, Veya was actually created to make the point that they could make a difference. And they started on their journey of what they call commercial disobedience, which I rather like, a form of activism, in 2004. I argue that in both books, in a sense, we need to fundamentally reimagine the world that we live in, as Dieter does and as Doug did also. And I think Veya is part of that reimagining. They demonstrate how the values and intentions of business are changing. And they are part of a revolutionary act of transforming how we see the world and how we can create products and services. They serve a social purpose with hope and also with optimism. And I think that's something that it takes us back to that language of beauty. It takes us to a point of a way of describing a better way that we can be in the world. And I think that if we're going to go on this journey of transformation together, and in a sense, time is pressing, but we also have a long horizon line if we want to think about it in this way, we've got to describe a world which is actually better than the one that we currently got. And I think, to me, that part of the storytelling is extremely important. Once upon a time, we used to think the business was binary. It was either or. If you were bringing the good into the world, maybe you weren't being as successful as a business. You weren't as focused on these important things about profit and shareholder return and all the rest of it. And I think what we've realized is actually we've lost something fundamental about what is the purpose of business. And lastly, I just want to sort of touch on this idea of what I call the mattering. So I've talked about purpose, but there's a design question that I use in the Do Build book, which is this whole thing about mattering. There's lots of people in this world that have purpose, but maybe their purpose is actually not the ones that the world really needs. So I think we need to reframe it in terms of what matters to us. So for the founders of Veya, how their trainers are made matters. How much their laborers are paid matters. How much does an organic cotton producer earn matters. What are the chemicals that are used in the processing of all of their materials matters, and where does that kind of end waste go to? I think asking those questions takes them down this journey of this path of transformation. I think it covers this idea of regeneration, the circular economy, leadership as generosity, this idea of the responsibility, or what I call the total of what we take, what we make, and what we waste. Let's think about it. The way that nature works, she doesn't waste a single atom. Surely, if we were going to create businesses that are going to be high performing and incredibly efficient, then we shouldn't be wasting a single atom either. And we could change the capacity of how our businesses operate through actually reframing the design way in which we approach those things in a fundamental way. There's something about this which I think maybe for you listening on this call would be good to reflect on. This idea of be unreasonable. If you're going to set a goal for transformation, this is what you should do. I also know, and we know, that there's a lot of science out there that tells us that our world is in peril or we're challenged in many ways. But I know that hearts change worlds, and we have to become amazing storytellers of actually how we can build a better world. And that is where we really need to put our efforts. Supply chains can be beautiful too. And I think because of all the questions we ask, those companies that I think are going to be really transparent and really thinking about that whole storytelling through what it is they take, make, and waste will be the ones that actually I think can take a huge leadership position. And to change everything, you need to take everybody with you. As we go on this journey of transformation, we should understand it's a learning process. We're going to make mistakes. Things won't work out. But I think it's very important to understand that we should look at it in that way. I've mentioned transparency, so I won't repeat myself again. I think we need leaders as activists, leaders within the system. There is a place maybe for all of the organizations in this world that are trying to change in process from outside the system. But I think systemically with inside, we can be lovingly disruptive and we can be activists in the good that we can bring to the world. And also I know that if we stay within constant dialogue, this is a platform today that we've got that opportunity to have that, then we can bring something very powerful to bear as a group around the world. Because I actually think it's no longer about a country by country way of thinking about the world. It's about we are a group of people which are self-identifying that actually want to be good ancestors and that we've got a very important role to play. And that is why I think beauty is the ultimate metric. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. That was very interesting and a great introduction. There's so many questions, but I wanted to kick off sort of drilling down into some of the things you mentioned. And in your Do Build book, you post 13 questions for an entrepreneur to ask it themselves, or a business leader for that matter, in terms of if their business makes sense. And you touched a bit just now in one of those questions, and does it matter? Why is that more relevant than what is traditionally considered as purpose, maybe?
Well, again, because I think it goes back to that idea of, and I wasn't naming any names, but there are some people out there that have purpose in this world, but their purpose is actually about power, and their purpose is about extraction. Their purpose is not about generosity in any way, shape, or form. And I think that the does it matter is a question which is, I mean, they are obviously linked, but I think, does it matter to me? Does it matter to the world? So in a way you can externalize it, but then you can internalize it in the same way. You can apply it in a way which I think is a deeper form of questioning in getting closer to maybe a truth of where you could be or should be operating from as an individual, as a leader, as an organization. Or actually in the book, you know, I use New Zealand as an example where actually one of the policies that they're pursuing is one around well-being. Now, that matters. And that to me is really important. And that's why I think I would fight for the word matter as opposed to the word purpose, because I think it's framed within a broader concept of generosity and contribution, which to me I think is important.
Absolutely. And in that sense, if it matters, and another interesting question, we have this sense that entrepreneurs are sacrificed, and they work way too much, and they pour their lives into their project. But I thought another question you had was very interesting, and is, will you enjoy the process? Because clearly our energy is driven from somewhere. So why is that question, I guess, so important?
Because I think that, as we know, if you're going to bring something new into the world, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, or even actually and there's another story of, let's say you're running a really big organization and you need to, change direction, that's going to be tough to do, either of those two things, whether you're working from a clean sheet of paper or whether you're working with an existing infrastructure. Right. That's going to ask a lot of you, because you're walking into a world which doesn't understand your story, hasn't been thinking as deeply as you are about what it is you want to do. And you've got a lot of work to do. You've got to explain to potential investors why this really matters. That's a tough conversation, an ongoing conversation. You know, I've got friends of mine which have spent 10 years trying to find the right money for the right reasons to do the thing they want to do, right? And there are going to be some really tough times within that process. There's times when things won't work out. Things are going to be difficult. I know when you creatively set your vision for a real outcome, creatively, you're really reaching for something, and you know that not everything is an easy step-by-step way of getting to that. So it's not about enjoying the process like every day as we're all sitting around, we're drinking coffee, we're having a joke over breakfast. This is about when it's really, really hard. Everyone still believes that this is worthwhile doing. You know, it's that moment when, do I walk away from this? Do we walk away from this? And I think there is a bit like, you know, climbing the mountain or, you know, running the race or completing it. There is an incredible sense of satisfaction in the end that you've committed to actually enduring working on that process. And I suppose in a broader concept of, say, cultural organizations or leadership is in that realm is, can we create a place of psychological safety where we are asking our teams to perform at a very high level, but actually we can all feel committed to going through that really tough moment or period together. And that's what I meant by that question, because it will give us enduring satisfaction that it was worth the while to do so.
That is very, very true. I mean, you have to inspire, I guess, a lot of people in the team to actually commit with you to that dream, to that vision, and make things happen. In this point you just touched on, which I think is also very important, and I think that in general is in a bit of a crisis, is leadership in general. What we see in our countries and organizations, and the concept of leadership has evolved quite a bit, or what is understood that we require from a leader. And particularly I'm interested in the most sort of business sense of that leader. And you say the leader has to be generous, and I think that's a great concept. But I'm guessing it also has to be empathic and understand that the situations, conditions, and different aspects of their team to be able to lead them forward. How do you describe in a more ample way that generosity concept in leadership, and what do you think are the things that are mostly lacking today in the leadership the businesses need in for this world?
It's a really good question, so thank you for asking it. In fact, I was just running a session yesterday with a group of people, and in fact, actually, the particular module we were exploring was leadership, and the work I'd asked them to do is reflect on this idea around generosity. And one of the things that came up was this idea that generosity is actually not an act of giving, but it's an act of allowing. It's a way of actually having a much broader look across the world that you're in, or the people that you're working for. Can you see and hear and listen to everyone that is part of your organization, or allow the people that are responsible for working in that space where you're acting in a generous way? And I suppose it's that it's also an idea of it links back into that deep idea in terms of, may I say, a higher order purpose about what it is you want to bring into the world. So your act is a form of generosity. The business that you're creating, its deepest level should be an act of generosity. But then on the day-to-day basis, we should be looking at how can we embed that into the way that the culture of an organization is working. And I was actually talking about a guy called Toto Wolff, and he is the owner and CEO of F1 Mercedes team, which he's done, I think, for about 7 years. Now, I'm not a fan of F1, but I'm very interested in high performance teams. And he tells the story of buying Mercedes, which had gone through a whole series of owners over a period of time, and their results have been very indifferent over that period of time. And he tells the story of giving a speech to the entire company that's all going to be great and it's all going to be different and everything's going to be wonderful. And he said, as everyone is filing out of the room, an engineer from the factory floor comes up to him. He's the last one in the room, and he says, "Nice words." And he said, I realized at that point that, something fundamental had to change. And he went into a lot of detail about how you create that place of psychological safety, as he said, where people can feel that they can operate at a place in authenticity. And as we know, one of the damaging problems is when you create organizational cultures which think they're trying to build high performance, but they're built on politics and hierarchy and all the rest of it. When trust is not really the container in which we operate in, then people will not give themselves truly because they're scared or worried. They operate in fear that actually they will reveal themselves to be vulnerable. So I think generosity is also an act of showing your own vulnerability. And I've learned that on my journey. The vulnerability is not weakness. It's the greatest strength of a human being can offer. That's not to say we talk about being a victim, but we can offer ourselves in a very different type of way. And I think there are many examples of how that generosity works. So how can you be generous with your trust? And I think the more trust that is built inside an organization, then the more people will show up. And actually you'll get a better, higher performance team. And he talks about, Toto, that ultimately dealing with the racing drivers that he does are very, very complex human beings. Their drivers are very, very complex. But he says what they know is that when they step into that racing car and they get onto that track, they take the entire responsibility, and it's their generosity to drive the best they can for the entire organization. So they're no longer driving for themselves entirely. It's a very different type of mindset. And I think that's where that idea of generosity then plays out in a very, very different type of way. You touched on empathy, you touched on compassion. How do we listen to someone with great empathy? And how can we operate in a place of non-judgment? Because we always judge all the time. And if an organization is working in a place of fear, for example, there's a lot of judging that goes on in second guessing. But actually what you're not doing is you're not doing what Moriyayu Shiba was doing, is bringing all of that wonderful energy all together to be unified, to do this amazing thing. And what I know is that cooperation is our superpower as human beings. And I think generosity is a kind of core part of that DNA.
Great. It's absolutely true. I think that that's a beautiful concept, most definitely. And how does that translate into the governance of companies? Today we have this more sort of rigid structures, and we have this sort of set equilibriums that have to be proposed for the governance out of a company. And we do know that the governance a company might have might sort of make it or break it. If that trust, if that is not allowed, it's very difficult for it to happen. So what do you think in your book, is there alternatives or values to the governance of a business that you think, aside from what we talked about in leadership, how that does it differentiate to the governance in general of the company, and the relationship maybe between founders and investors, between the different actors in a business?
It's a very good question. I think that just stepping back from that slightly, but then going into it, which is, we have grown up, I grew up in a world where, it was all about acceleration to growth for success. And we would define that in a 5 to 10 year timeline. We were really trained or framed in the language of winner takes all, and that the success would be build the company, build the growth, build the value in the organization, sell it to somebody else, then you've been successful. But what we weren't trained in, or we weren't asked to think about, was that concepts about legacy and ancestry. We weren't being asked to think about our children or our children's children. What are the decisions that we're making today that will have a consequence in 7 generations down the road? That's in part indigenous wisdom, as you know, in terms of how we think about these things. And those things are slowly coming back onto the table. And there are some VCs that have spoken to me, and they said, the challenge, Alan, is what you're talking about is a very long horizon line. And, most VC funds only work within a 5 to 10 year, window. And in the book, I talk about Climeworks, the company which is building these amazing machines, which are scaling up to suck huge quantities of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. But all of their money has come from wealthy individuals, simply because VC just doesn't have the capacity to. He said, Jan Wurzbacher, one of the founders, said, you can't build a regenerative business in a 10-year time frame. It's simply not possible. So there's some bigger reframing that needs to be done. And although what we do see is, with the ESG, so environmental, social and governance models, is there's a lot of money in migration at the moment in actually starting to understand now that this conversation needs to be had. There was an interesting conversation yesterday about a Nordic company called Novo Nordisk, which is a big pharma company. And actually what they've done is they created a company where they've got 2 sets of shares. They've got A shares and B shares. And it allows people to invest in the company. And obviously it's a big company. There's lots of revenues there. But the way that it's structured means that money coming in will not affect the long-term planning of how that company is going to deliver on its mission. And its mission is actually to reduce the amount of disease that's in the world. So although they're a pharma company, you might say actually their modus operandi, let's say, let's think about, the family in the States at the moment who generated, the opioids, and growth for growth's sake has created a huge issue for them. Novo Nordisk has got a very different kind of governance structure, which allows them to operate as a consequence of that. Of course, you've also got B Corp, which is a global business, which is an ongoing certification process, which allows people to think very differently about the nature of their business. And in Germany also, there are a whole variety of other different sort of ownership structures, but these are based in a much more kind of longer term time frame in terms of how you think about how that business is going to operate going forwards. And I think in some respects, I think what upsets me is when we saw what happened with the global financial crisis, we would have thought the world would have learned the lesson then that, growth for growth's sake at all at any cost was perhaps not the best, business model that we had. But we seem to double down on those things. And so I think that if you're going to build for the future, you're going to build for resilience, you've got to think very differently, both in terms of time frame and the governance models that would be working for you. And I'm sure in Argentina and through Latin America, you will have other very good examples of organizations and businesses that are building themselves within that context. But I think our work as entrepreneurs is now about the work of about legacy and ancestry, rather than looking at we're a unicorn. And to me, I never really understood that concept. I think it's a very complicated metaphor for many reasons, as I'm sure you would agree.
Absolutely. We, although in the industry that the term is referred to a lot, what I believe is as venture capital investors, we're here to help companies grow in a stage of their life, not forever, but that company has to have that longer term vision, that sense of mattering, as you said, which is far longer than maybe what a given venture investor can provide at a point in time. So we're important and sometimes very critical to the process, but we're not the whole thing, and we shouldn't aspire to be the whole thing, because our ability to recycle that capital and to move it along through the process is also what helps those businesses have those longer term visions and being able to fulfill them as they go through life. And that is not a finite horizon. It has to be a more permanent one, and it will transfer generations. So we cannot assume that we're successful when something starts and only if it if it's sold or if it finishes. It's again, that sort of finite horizon is, I think, the wrong way to look at it. I share what you're saying in terms of looking at it in a much more in a longer perspective, in a way that you can look at ancestry and legacy and what you're leaving for future generations. The world has been here for us for centuries and centuries, and it will be here, hopefully, if we all take care of it the right way. Well, so yeah, go ahead.
Can I just respond to that, because I think you said something very important, and I agree with you. What I would say is that VC kind of community should play, and must play a very, very important role in the seeding of what would be the new ecosystem. So it could well be that you would ask very different types of questions, however, in terms of what is the purpose or the mattering of those people that come to you. If collectively within Argentina you were asking those questions, if we were to bring a cohort, so in a sense you're bringing cohorts into the world, and that's very important. You're the birthing of those cohorts. We know that nothing gets off the ground without the oxygen of money. It's very, very important. And I hear what you're saying, and in a sense, that's why it's called seed funding. Maybe you're planting the seeds, right, in terms of what you grow. But what is it we want them to grow into? And I think asking that, if that VC community was then asking some really challenging questions to the people that would come. We know on MBAs, we're not being reconnected to nature. We're not being reconnected to the language of beauty. We're not talking about regeneration. Maybe in a few years' time that will happen, and maybe there's already that's sort of growing. But professionally, really asking those questions of these people right here, right now, means that the legacy that you're creating, albeit through the seed work that you're doing, means that those people are very clear about the direction of where they want to be going to. And ultimately, they are contributing to the long-term economy of Argentina or Latin America in a way that I think is extremely important. And that's why I would say, I have the luxury to say the things I do because I don't run a VC fund. So, and I have to put my hand up to that. But the dialogue, I think, is very important.
Absolutely. The dialogue, I think, is fundamental. I just want to remind everybody we're going to open for questions from the audience. We have a couple, but if anybody wants to ask Alan any questions, you're more than welcome. Before we go and open to the public, Alan, I wanted to ask you one last question. You explained very nicely in the beginning the concept of beauty and how and how that affects all things. And I know that you looked up to the author, poet, and artist and critic John Ruskin, and he said, "There's no wealth but life." And he also said that when love and skill work together, you can expect a masterpiece. So why were you so inspired by this? And I think these are very powerful phrases, but where did you reach from to see all of this connecting in the beauty connecting in the business world and in life? I thought his phrases were very precise and very interesting.
Well, Ruskin is an extraordinary human being, and very, very influential, in his time. And in a sense, I think he carried an integral way of looking at the world, rather than looking at the world through a singular lens. There was always a sense of that sort of social justice that was very deeply related to his work in many ways. In fact, actually, he almost single-handedly saved Venice the first time round, in his lifetime, when it was looking like it was going to, fall to ruin. He cared deeply about people, and he believed that the sort of artistic and cultural fabric of life was something that was fundamental. And I think we can't live without those things. And so, in a sense, he's someone that I would hold very close to my heart, which is why I quote him, because I think it sort of it links it back into that point, which is, as a business, in the end, who are you truly serving? There's a French term, and I can't remember what it was, and I don't know whether it comes out of the French word of commerce or whatever, but it's actually about being service to, the greater good. And we seem to have forgotten that. And I know from my time of working in industry in a whole variety of different ways, it's somehow we walk inside an organization, which is a business, and then we start to use a language which anyone that was walking down the street would not understand a single word that we were saying, and yet actually we're there influencing their lives in a whole variety of different ways. And I think that Ruskin was very interested in the rebalancing of that equilibrium. He was very interested in ecology. He was very interested in society. He was very interested in art and culture. And here I am. Behind me, I've got a picture of, God, his name escapes me now. Maybe somebody else can remind me who he is, with the hat on, and I can't remember. It will come to me. Very famous German artist, or the books that I've got, or kind of whatever. All of this is actually very important to me. They're the kind of cultural aspects of my Joseph Beuys. So the artist is Joseph Beuys, and Joseph Beuys actually had a very visionary way of how we could think about the world. And it's almost like somehow, that sort of separation between business and culture and life and whatever. Yet actually, what do we do when we have time off? Well, when we're allowed to outside of lockdown, we go to a restaurant, we're going to drink, like, Tony with his generosity, which is how we met, taking me to Soho in Buenos Aires. We had great food, great conversation, wonderful wine. All of those things were combined together, and in a sense, that's a unification of what it is that we're doing. And that, to me, was, a deeply held memory and something that I was very important to me. And it goes back to, I think, the Vella thing. Someone who said to me was a lot younger. She said, when we're talking about Vella, as you know, increasingly a popular brand, their design looks great, but they have a much bigger story. She said, we want we want the cool thing, and we want the right thing. And I think that those businesses which are kind of focused on a non-binary way of looking at the world about business will be reconnecting to Ruskin ideals. And I'm sure that there will be people within, your country, within their own way, would have articulated that need to kind of get back to the essence of how important all of those things are.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. We have a question from the audience that says, they say beauty is a natural thing, that we naturally appreciate it. Are we doing business unnaturally when we create this regarding beauty?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that we don't. I mean, at the moment, if you just look at how we evaluate assets, we think it's okay to take natural resource from the world, but we don't put a value on it until we turn it into a product. So we don't appreciate its value in many ways. We don't think about it in that sense at all. And of course, within there's a lady called Robin Wall Kimmerer who wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and is a really wonderful book. And she talks about the Honourable Harvest. So in Native American culture and thinking is you only take half of what is available because you give back to the world. And in a sense, you're always leaving more. And we have a huge challenge, I think, to rebalance that context and that concept. It may, if I was talking about this 10 years ago, I would have felt very uncomfortable talking about it, if I'm honest. But I think that it's absolutely essential now for us to go back to that set of metrics, and that thinking about what it is we're taking and what does it mean and how do we honor it, and what are we giving back, because, and I didn't use this word, but we can't do business on a dead planet. I mean, it's really simple. And in a sense, all of the language around climate crisis is difficult, it's painful, because in a way it comes with a lot of doom stuff to it. And there's a reason for that, I believe. On the other hand, as my friend Paul Hawkins said, the climate crisis is an opportunity for us to really fundamentally rethink what it is we're doing. Everything man-made in this world is designed, so we can go back and learn from nature's playbook, and we can work in a way which I think is in harmony with the playbook of the natural world. That will be a process. It's not something we can do overnight, but what I'm trying to show is it's possible and it's doable, whether you're a one-man or one woman or one person business, or whether you're in the business of running a country, you can still be looking at those things and bringing that equilibrium back together.
Absolutely. We have another question, and I'll expand it a bit, but essentially we, as you mentioned, we have the B Lab of the B corporations, sort of in this sense, with metrics and everything resolved. Do we think there's a formula to this, or do we need to all dig deeper and internalize more of these things culturally, as a society, to build the right companies or businesses?
I think it's a very deep cultural process to begin with. So the way that my work has been in my life a lot to do with designing and making things in a whole variety of different forms. So application for me is very important. But I've always been interested in the how. And it's why in Do Build, I talk about the foundations, where I talk about beauty, nature, biomimicry, design, values and metrics, and governance. But that cultural reformatting, we need a different set of lenses. So I've got my binoculars out now, or my kaleidoscope. But we need a different set of lenses, and we need a different framework, in a sense, in which we can have a conversation about those things. Because without the cultural resetting, we're actually just operating within the same systems that we are operating in. What I can say is, from a very optimistic perspective, for what I see, is there is an ecosystem, a growing one, and a tribe which is international and global, which is already having that conversation in a whole variety of different ways. And so I think it's already on its way.
That's great. Thank you, Alan. We've past the time now, but we're, I think, just about. It was wonderful having you here today. I think this was a wonderful talk. And to finish it, from your author and poet, which you quoted so much in your book, I also thought it was interesting that he said the quality is never an accident, and it's always the result of intelligent effort. And I think we all here, everybody that has participated here, are very intelligent human beings. And if we all put our intelligence efforts together, not only beautiful, but quality things can come off that. So thank you very much. I recommend everybody to read Alan's books, Do Build and Do Design. I would recommend to start by Do Design, because I think it's the basis of the concepts you're explaining. But they're wonderful, and they certainly make us think a lot about how to focus our day to day in doing what we're doing. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, Gabby, and to all of you at Overboost, and to everyone in Argentina. It's been a privilege to talk and share with you today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Bye.